Hello and welcome to another LinkedIn Live by Orbition Group. Julia Westland on stage. So Julia, for all of you that don't know, spent many years in industry, mainly in management consulting with the likes of Accenture and BCG, then moved into the executive search headhunting space and is now a career coach, all within the realms of data and analytics, and our worlds have kind of collided because of that. So I'll welcome Julia up to the stage. Julia, just give us a brief introduction into your background and I guess journey to date up until this point in time, if you would.
Great. Hi, everybody. So super nice to see all of you now that we are live. My background is management consulting. I worked at BCG and Accenture, and that's how I got involved in the data and analytics landscape in kind of early 2012, 2013, when things started exploding in Europe. And after that, I moved into Spencer Stuart, where I co-led the data and analytics practice at Spencer Stuart, the global headhunting firm, for about 7 years. And now I'm a career coach. And as a career coach, I help leaders kind of position themselves for the role that they want.
Yep, nice. We've been through all this, but that's what I say. This feels like deja vu, but it's because it is deja vu. Just talk to me very briefly because I want to jump into this, and hopefully the questions come flooding in. But why make the move from industry to executive search and then again into career coaching?
Yeah. So when I was at BCG and I helped start up the data and analytics business, what we found was we were solving problems for clients, but they didn't always have, and actually they frequently didn't have the right talent to help them, take that strategy and bring it to life. And it's because it was such early days that the talent that exists today didn't exist back then. And so I saw repeatedly, teams work with the internal organizations to create great plans, but weren't always able to bring those to fruition in the way that they were designed. And I saw actually that a lot of our clients were partnering with search firms who at the time didn't necessarily have the background or the knowledge that was needed to find the right kind of leaders, because it required really creative thinking at the point in time. And so when I was approached by Spencer Stuart to kind of come and co-lead the data and analytics practice globally and also do tech search work as well, it just seemed like an absolute exciting opportunity to help those organizations make the right talent decisions.
Yeah.
And now I'm kind of doing that next evolution of that. What I saw in search was people who had the right skills, capabilities, and experiences didn't necessarily know how to talk about them in a way that got them the roles that they were fully qualified to have. And so I found that actually by helping those leaders tell the stories in the right way and position themselves for the right kind of role, I've been able to help people even further, which is the strong theme throughout my career, is kind of tech and people together in one.
Yeah, nice. A lot of comments now. So yeah, see all these comments. People have finally found us. Apologies about this. This is my favourite. Thanks, Lynn. Yeah. Might as well keep turning the screw. So Julia, obviously having been on several sides of this kind of hiring and talent landscape equation, from in the industry to supplying the industry with talent to now helping talent get jobs effectively and kind of be successful in their careers, how would you describe the current data landscape and talent market as it stands today? And are there any kind of specific trends or themes or anything that you're kind of seeing as you're having these conversations with the people that you're coaching?
Yeah, that's a great one. As you know, as a headhunter, and I talk to a lot of different headhunters who have said basically feel like they're coming out of a really long downturn, kind of a 2-year long cycle of downturn, and it's been a difficult time. But despite that sort of downturn, I'm really excited that perhaps it's accelerated by, or even in spite of AI. I'm not clear which. We're still seeing great demand for data and analytics leaders, and I know that will continue. Some recent examples from my own client work is one of my clients got an offer this week from a Fortune 50 company for a C-level chief data and analytics officer role. It wasn't their first one, so they were pretty sophisticated about what they wanted to go out to market for. And that Fortune 50 company did its own recruitment for this role internally, which is a really interesting kind of shift I've seen in the last 15 or so years, where really internal teams weren't necessarily doing the recruitment themselves. I'm also seeing, growth stage businesses, but established businesses hire this kind of talent. And from there, for example, someone I know really well recently moved from payments into a chief analytics officer role for a growth stage business. And one of my clients got an offer for a conglomerate business. And in that case, they're hiring their first chief data and analytics officer. So the market is strong. There's still demand for this talent, but what I'm seeing is a few different levels of sophistication in a way that we haven't seen in the past. So one is that company theme that I talked about. Companies know what they want. They're going to market being really specific about the talent they want. Sometimes looking for, often my experience was they were looking for unicorns, and that can be very difficult. But there are a lot of unicorns out there, and we're lucky to have a lot of them on this call right now. So that's exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And companies, they're in what before was maybe a dream or a promise is being informed by lived experience, either that the leaders, the executive teams, or the board has had itself from their experience of having strong data leaders as part of their organization, or informed by their industry peers. So they're sort of watching as teams, data science maybe, or broader analytics capabilities are being built. And some of those analytics teams, which before were working a lot on the internal workings, the kind of platforms and foundations, are pivoting into commercializing those offerings. And that's very exciting. And that's what I know CEOs want to see. And we're seeing big sophistication around talent. So in those early doors, 2012, 2013, you kind of came from one of three different backgrounds. It was like business, math, or tech. And now we've got, specialized, like the university graduates are coming out with data science degrees. I'm on the advisory board at Imperial College for their master's degree in business analytics. 10 years ago, that didn't exist. I know because I've been there since the beginning of them creating it. But that just means that what talent can offer is so much more specialized than it was before. And it means that, companies can ask for very differentiated things. I'm also seeing geography play a role. So they're quite mature in this landscape in the US. Historically in Europe, maybe we were kind of like fast followers. I'm not seeing that so much before. I think actually the talent is pretty fluid between the groups. And then I would say a big change is maybe 5 years ago, Asia was sort of more behind. But now I think AI has really accelerated that journey, and some of the governments are really pushing to invest heavily in AI. And so the bar is being leveled. But in the growth stage, that's not necessarily the case because the US VC market makes it such that there is a big demand for talent, and the salaries commanded in North America are standout compared to what we see in the other geographies.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think what you talked about earlier about the kind of the differences in company. I mean, I might as well record myself saying this and just play it on repeat. But context is huge, right?
Yeah.
In terms of the company and what they do, the size, the sector, the maturity of what has been before it or not, as the case may be, plays a massive part in the type of profile that a business wants or maybe thinks that they want. And I think I see often two ends of a spectrum play out. Like businesses will come with a very pointed kind of self-diagnosed, we need this, or the conversation is actually we don't have a clue what we want, or can you help us?
Yeah.
But I think there's a huge amount of obviously disparity and lack of standardization, right, in our industry. And again, I talk about this a lot, but I think that plays into the complexity. It feels like there are a lot of jobs out there still, despite a lot of the doom and gloom maybe that you see and hear on platforms like LinkedIn. But the opportunity is there, but it's matching all of that up, right? Which I know we're going to get into today, which is I guess part of my job, but especially part of your job to help people to kind of go on that journey. I'd say because we, as an example, we helped an e-commerce business at the end of last year to hire a director of data. And on the premise of it, we got flooded with applications and anyone looking at that thinking, well, I could do that job, right? But the business was kind of saying, we want someone that comes from a very specific type of background that has done this kind of tech platform e-commerce play before. And obviously people that have worked as a director of data doing what seems on the face of it a same job, but in banking or whatever the case may be, they weren't quite interested in. Now, rightly or wrongly, right? That's a different topic. But I think that the lack of standardization probably does cause a lot of confusion. I'd be keen to get your thoughts on how you help the people you coach navigate that, because we see it all the time, right? A chief data officer role in one business is completely different role to what a chief data officer role is in another business, and roles, titles, this is just a mishmash of things.
Yeah. That part is tricky. One thing that hasn't changed in the 17 years since this role was created out of the financial crisis of 2008 is, there's no standardization on titles, and you'd think that 17 years is quite a long time for something to get quite mature, but we're not really necessarily seeing it, and an AI is not going to help us kind of create further kind of standardization in terms of that. But position, I think context is everything, and the talent being more specialized does mean that what we had in terms of fluidity, even like 8 years ago, where you could take a banking person and then put them into e-commerce and they could show and explain maturity and how it was, we did this here and here's how I would do it there. Companies can be more picky now because there will be 3 e-commerce people who have done exactly what they want. And so the banking person has to work maybe extra hard to create those connections. So getting in the mindset of that organization, what they do kind of commercially, how they function, and selling yourself as someone who already thinks like them is the way to win. And I think that is the biggest unlock that I work with, like with my clients, so that they can articulate it well to people like you, Kyle, and you can sell that super well to your clients to say, you know what, you're right. On the outside, it doesn't sound the same. And they haven't done exactly the same. But here's 3 really special things they do. You should meet them and you decide whether you want to take the leap on this person who doesn't come from and also doesn't bring all the preconceived notions and barriers that exist within an industry or a particular sector. Sometimes it's good to have somebody who can refactor, and often I should say, it's good to someone who can refactor and drive the change.
100%. I think most industries actually are open to bringing someone in from the outside. I think often it's more the context of the business than it is the sector, maybe, in terms of the type of work that they need to be doing. Insurance is probably renowned for being quite narrow-minded as to they want people that have been there and done that. But really, I think that's probably the only standout sector for me. Obviously, there's a lot made, Julia, about, the lack of value and the fact that, that's resulted in a number of organizations deciding to kind of cut roles and budgets of kind of data leaders in whatever kind of title or guise that is. That's led to a lot of conversations around the role needing to evolve. Where do you think we're heading with that?
Yeah. Like I said, the role kind of started in 2008 with the financial crisis. And then things got more mature in kind of 2012, 2013, where we could talk about the different backgrounds, where these people come from. And then now we're in the sort of super specialized era. But, something you said about organizational maturity, I think really stands out to me about where we are now with this role is a lot of organizations have gotten started and they've tried and experimented. And so it's about the particular organization and what is its maturity. And with respect to the talent, I mean, if you are a CDAO who's worked in a super mature organization, almost your opportunity is to federate the data and analytics capability back out to those, particular business units. And then you could say you maybe put yourself out of a job, or you have this great opportunity to pivot. You recently interviewed somebody, Kyle, who has become a chief operating officer. And I saw that a lot. So you just mentioned insurance. James Platt was the chief data and analytics officer of Aon's data and analytics business. And then he went on to become their chief operating officer. Vlad Kilkenis, who is the chief data and analytics officer of William Hill, has gone on now to become the CEO of Boyle Sports. These data leaders who are ready kind of to go from foundation building to scaling to mature and federating can then go on to be business unit leaders. And I work with a lot of my clients on that. but it takes a certain personality to do that. Right place, right time. Like that's always the magic fairy dust that helps everybody kind of fly along. But for those who are proactively trying to make that pivot, being able to articulate, what you can do and plant those seeds for people in that way. And then finding a leader who's open to that, who sees that, yeah, you're that data leader. Okay, wow. You've had to think commercially. You've had to build bridges across an entire organization. You've had to transform in a way that probably, your CFO doesn't have to, because those career paths are quite, well defined, and how they operate is quite well defined. So finding the right person who's open-minded to take one of those leaders, I think, is very exciting. If you're in a different area in your career, maybe just starting out or kind of middle management, I think it's also still a very exciting time, because you can look up. There are all these people who remain CDAOs, and there are still needs for those roles. Those roles are very diversified. So if you enjoy the governance and the compliance, those are exciting career paths that continue to be options for you. If you like the tech, same thing. If you like that commercial aspect, the sky's the limit, right? And then we've got product as part of that too. And product analytics is this very kind of continuing to mature and evolve kind of role. And we've got AI and ML. So there's so many great opportunities. I think the role is going to continue to be more specialized. And I hope that there will be more and more CDAOs who become, into operations paths, commercial leaders, or CEOs of businesses.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, a couple of things that you've said that I think are really important to reiterate. Like, I spend my time telling people at the kind of CDO level or kind of senior leadership level that are looking for the next gig, like, timing is everything. Like that you can decide that now is the time, and unfortunately for you, it might just not be the time. Like, that's, and so I think there's definitely something around that for sure. But I also agree with you. I don't think that the CDAO role should be the pinnacle for people in this space. Like, I think, especially as we start to move to this kind of notion that data analytics will eventually just become the norm. Like, it'll become table stakes, right? I know at the minute we're still in this place where if you do it well, it's a competitive advantage. But with AI and all of the kind of advanced stuff that's happening now, I think we'll get to a place where, well, the businesses that aren't doing it are just getting left behind. So, that provides a load of opportunity for people at a certain level to drive real change through a period of time that's a little bit unknown for most businesses, which will put them in prime position, right, for kind of the big roles that come up then, because hopefully they've been the one to deliver.
Yeah. Yeah. And, as you were saying that, Kyle, I also thought about something that it wasn't, if you asked me in 2012, 2013, what's really important, I probably would have said like the tech and the platforms and maybe the governance. Now what's really important is the commerciality and building those bridges, driving the change. But a big thing I saw when I was at Spencer Stuart was companies couldn't articulate it, but actually what they were asking for were leaders who could kind of partner with them and educate them. Not in a way that was genuinely raising everybody's level of knowledge together. And so that CDAO role is so specialized, because you need to be a little bit educator, a little bit commercial, a little bit people and change, a little bit tech. And so we're asking, you guys are all unicorns, like on this call in different ways, you are all unicorns. And I think about yourself, think about what you do, what you enjoy most, and figure out what one or two of your superpowers are and market yourself against those. Will serve you in really good stead. But whatever you do, find ways to raise everybody's level of knowledge and genuinely be helpful, because this AI chapter is unknown for a lot of people. And if you can be seen as that helpful person who makes everybody feel smart, you'll be included as part of the continued conversation about what the organization is doing, in that.
Yeah, 100%. Lynn's dropped a question in here, which I think is possibly a good time to answer before we get into the kind of real tactical stuff that these people can be doing to help themselves. She's asked, despite the context point, which she agrees with, are we seeing any items in a job description that come up time and time again as Gen? And then the next question is, has Gen AI changed this?
Yeah. And so something that comes up again and again, I think, is that change management is big. Kyle, you posted about it, the other day about, we talk about data leadership, but it should just be about leadership. And where I saw those chief data and analytics officers stand out, the really special ones versus the pack, were those who had those just great leadership skills, strategic thinking, communication and influencing, all of that stakeholder management piece, and doing that, in an important way, I think are capabilities that I've really seen in high demand. And that is a big evolution that has changed. And I am, it's interesting because 2008 was the origin of the role. It was all governance, came out of like the Frank Dodd regulation in the US, and it was all governance. There aren't, the CDAO role, although no board members or CEOs I would talk to would really want to talk about the governance requirements of the role. It's not in the definition. It's not, chief governance officer, right? It's like chief or head of data and analytics. But it is an important aspect of the role still. How is Gen AI changing this, or is Gen AI? I'm seeing organizations come back to those early period of 2012 when they didn't know, and they didn't know about the tech platform. Then it was like, help us decide what we should do with tech, and like, help us decide how we should organize. I'm now seeing that kind of, we don't know how to go forward. We're looking for someone to partner with us and help us build a strategy. I am seeing that. That is, for me, is one big change in the Gen AI space. What are you seeing, Kyle?
Yeah, again, I mean, to be honest with you, I think it depends on the organization and where they're at. I think, I've likened this whole AI boom to that of data science in the sense that obviously much more potential, businesses probably a lot more serious about it, but still a lot of businesses that are probably not ready, right, in terms of where they're at on that journey. But it's the shiny new thing, right? So they're going to go after it kind of no matter what. But I think that the positive of that has been that it has started to shine the spotlight back on some of the important things that have probably been underinvested in for a long time. So data management all of a sudden seems to be having a bit of a revive, right? Because business leaders and board members are they're so bought into this. Well, if we don't do this AI thing and our competitors do, are we going to get left behind? And all of a sudden there's that kind of shining of the light back on the fact, well, actually to do this well, we need good data and so on and so forth. So I think that provides opportunity. But yeah, I think, I probably bang on about this a little bit too much, to be honest with you, but I'd agree with everything you said there around the kind of the change management, the influencing, the strategic, the commercial, just the broad brush leadership skills, really be that first. And then the data and the tech skills are almost a prerequisite to a certain degree, right? So I think it's interesting. Obviously, let's jump. I'm conscious of time. I'm also conscious that we absolutely butchered the start of it. So, but I guess in terms of CVs, so this is something that is super fascinating, but I know is a big part of what you do with your with the clients that you help to coach, is the kind of the positioning of it and navigating that job search and so on and so forth. So I guess, are there any kind of key elements of, I guess, a high impact CV / resume? Kind of what advice do you normally give on that?
Yeah. So absolutely. I mean, I think your CV and your LinkedIn page and your stories comprise your 3 biggest assets when you're going to market to try and find a job. And that's whether you're looking or you're even just experimenting, but it is an asset. And like any asset, you want to, take care of it, review it regularly, make sure it's a good reflection of where you want to be. And it requires an investment and time. So one big trend is that 97% of companies are using applicant tracking systems, and they're using the AI tools in those applicant tracking systems to now scan your CV. So are headhunters. So headhunters are also investing in these AI-enabled platforms that are scanning your CV and proactively making lists of what they think is the best talent for a particular role and proposing those people to the search teams. So getting your CV right and those keywords right really, really matter. On the point of the applicant tracking system, if you don't actually use the specific words in a job advert on your actual CV, so even if you think it means broadly the same thing, you have to use their words in order to get matched to the top. So the table stakes now are actually pretty high. Unfortunately, you could argue it's an AI-enabled race to the bottom, which is like a whole different discussion we'll have another time. So what does every CV need to have? It needs to be simple. So if we think about AI enabled, think about how the AI will scan your CV. If you've got lots of columns and you're using tables in all different ways and special sections, that messes the AI up. So keep it really simple. You need your name, like the role. Actually, it should be the role that you're applying for as the title. And then the basic stuff like your phone number, your email address, and your link to LinkedIn. I don't, continental Europe is a little bit different. You often need a picture, and address is often still important there. And actually, surprisingly, date of birth and marital status. In the UK, we don't have that, and in the US, we don't ask for that at all. So those things feature at the top. I think you should have, and the industry really looks for an important about section, something where if the person reads that top paragraph, they get a good understanding of what you're like, and that's your discretionary space you get to kind of really sell yourself. Have a key achievements section and quantify them. Kyle, you're always talking about this. Quantify. No matter what you've done, find a way to quantify. I work with a lot of my clients who have been CDAOs for a long time, and they'll say, I can't remember what the impact was. Like, it's okay. We're going to estimate. We're going to try and estimate where we were, or we're going to write to people who at the time were there, and maybe they'll remember. We find ways to quantify, and it's important to do that. And then give your career history, but do it in a way that positions you for the role you want, not in the like absolutely 100%, this went in, that came out kind of documented moment in time. That you are allowed some element of kind of shaping things to look the way that you want. So those would be like my key things. Oh, and ultimate 2 pages. It's not important how long you've been on the planet. Everything that you want this person to read is digestible in 2 minutes, because people will look at your CV for an average of 7 seconds. And if it doesn't stick out in 7 seconds, it'll get missed.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's so much to unpack in here if we wanted to. I think the AI piece is also for me tied to, in a very similar vein to how organizations recruit, like through internal talent teams, right? And this is no slant on anybody at all, but often nuances aren't understood. So as an example to your point, me and you looking at a CV would understand that if somebody put, I don't know, off the top of my head, data enablement,
yeah,
right? But the way that it was framed inside a business was, I don't know, data activation, as an example, we'd know that that's the same thing, right? So we could say, yeah, that's fine. They've done that work. They've delivered it. They've quantified it. They've blah, 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 blah. AI probably doesn't know that. And a generalist recruiter that's recruiting across every role inside an enterprise also doesn't know that, right? So I think that's one of the things why I always break it down into kind of 3 very simple buckets. There's the identification of talent, there's the engagement of that talent, and then there's the assessment of that talent. And often businesses falter at the identification stage because the language is different. What they call something in one business is different to another. It's like the data engineering world. I can probably tell you 5 or 6 different titles that would quantify, in my and your eyes, a data engineer that's used in different companies. Equally, I can tell you that there's probably 5 or 6 different roles that use the title data engineer that are doing different jobs. Yeah. So it's such a complex thing, and why language is so important. But I think often people get frustrated because it's, like I say, it's the time investment that's required, right? But fundamentally, if you want to do well, you've kind of got to put the work in. I've had countless back and forths on LinkedIn with people saying, well, in today's world, we don't have time to be doing this. And I'm kind of like, well, that's fair enough. That's your prerogative. But equally then don't be whinging so much when, because the genesis of that conversation was I'm applying to loads of jobs and not getting any interviews. Yeah, and I'm like, well, I don't know what to tell you, right? So it's
there's this dialogue going on around the internet about how, since everything is AI enabled, that the need for the CV will disappear, and that recruitment is moving more towards assessment of talent, like just the assessment bit. And I actually, from where I sit, and Kyle, you too, we assess talent all the time. Sometimes it's a quantified way. So at Spencer Stuart, we did have like a quantified way we would assess talent. And maybe the CV will disappear. So for those people that you engage with who say, hey, I don't have time for a CV, okay, their day may come. Like you said, timing is everything. But right now, for the senior level roles, people want a CV to look at. And right now, applicant tracking systems are being used. So right now, if you want to be considered, you got to play the game. And that doesn't mean, we've seen it with AI, right? That doesn't mean the game might not change quickly. It will, perhaps. But right now, you've got to have a CV that markets you for the role that you want, not some view of what was in the past. And you need to use the right terms and phrases to get noticed.
Yeah. And outcomes, right? I think outcomes is a big thing. Like we talked about quantifying it, but it's quantifying it and in terms of business outcomes that maybe people, because typically the people that are hiring for these roles aren't data people, right? So they need to see it in a strategic / commercial setting. The amount of CVs I look at that do a fantastic job of describing what they do, and I'm kind of like, and what, like, there's a bit missing here, and it's a really good CV up until this point. So
leading with responsibilities and not measurable achievements and business impact is just going to leave you behind. And I work with my clients to do that. So
100%. A few questions coming in here, so let's try and get through them. So Matt has asked a similar question to Lynn by all accounts, but he said, Gen AI has lots of people spooked. What do we think things like Matt might look like in the next 3 to 5 years?
In terms of CVs or?
Yeah. Do you want to clarify that for us, Matt? Skills, CVs? We'll come back to that in a second.
I mean, we've talked about it really in terms of CVs, right? With the AI-enabled race, CVs might disappear. When I joined Spencer Stuart 7 years ago, I was advocating for just videos. Imagine if we no longer needed CVs and your application for a role was like a 30-second or let's say minute-long video, you pitching yourself, ultimately a video pitch. Spencer Stuart didn't buy it at the time. And who knows, maybe an AI will make all of that much easier. But what a great way to, apply for a role. You can sort of see how the person is and hear it from them, hear them articulate themselves, directly. And I think that could be a great.
Yeah. And we incorporate that sometimes as part of our process. Depends on the organization and how into it they are. There's definitely challenges with it. It's by no means perfect, but actually I think it's a really good mechanism to see beyond the CV. I talk about this a lot, right? We'll shortlist a CV, and I've been doing this a long time, and I know that this person's exactly what you're looking for, and someone will look at the CV and go, yeah, no, I don't think they're right for X, Y, and Z, and I'm like, no, like, I promise you, they're right. And it comes down to obviously me then having to sell the CV partly because of the things that you've just said there, right? But video kind of definitely helps with that.
It obviously helps in some ways and then could have biases in others, but we all recognize no one thing is perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. Kareem message asked, so she said, just take a role name and change data with information. You may have different flavors and expectations about what was done. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Matteo has asked, he said, when we talk about data leadership roles, there is a tendency to focus on companies that are not considered tech companies. Google, Amazon, and the likes don't have a CDO. Do you have, it's too long, let me try and find the rest of it. Do you have recommendations for people working in this type of company about how to progress their careers when there is no data function? That's a really interesting question. So I think he's saying in businesses that don't have a central data office, as it were, how do you progress? Which I know is probably one of the limitations of having a federated model, right?
It's great. I mean, I think it depends ultimately what is your career objective. And in my reboot program, I work with clients on 3 different phases. And phase 1 is what really is your target? And we explore a lot, what that is. So if your target is to be a CDAO, then that might help you influence and shape your career around the kinds of organizations maybe to change into that allow you to build the experiences necessary to kind of ultimately get you to a CDAO type position. On the other hand, if what your objective is to be a very commercial person, a role where you're doing analytics for a particular product set, perhaps at Amazon, puts you in a great position to maybe be that category leader, then a kind of country lead, then a sector leader, then a country leader, and then kind of beyond. Or possibly platforms, right? So maybe you're working as a data engineer and you're looking at some of the technology. And so that allows you to perhaps move into an organization that's building a specialized piece of tech. And then that role can ultimately be a bit commercial, a bit tech, and, and many other things. So I would just say my recommendation would be put some time in your diary to block out, kind of like think what the next 5 years could be. And if that isn't far enough forward to help you make this decision, imagine a couple different scenarios of what could kind of 10 years out be. Score those for like, where do you feel most affinity towards, and use those as guiding principles for some career choices, and continue to evolve them, right? Because we're humans, we change all the time. Maybe you've explored one that you thought was great and actually didn't like it. So use those. But those are great places to have on your CV. Kyle, you probably have this too, but I would have many times, my clients who would we would put somebody on the list who'd been at Google, and they would almost sometimes favor those people who had been at those organizations, even though, as you say, the context of how things work in Google are very different than how, say, it would work in the organization that I was helping to hire for. But there's that whole idea of change, wanting to inspire and be different and move towards something different, that sometimes organizations hired those people to be those change agents.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I know what you're going to say to this, but given, the transition from search into career coaching, how frequent is it in your eyes that you see people are being very intentional about their career moves? Because this is something that I've talked about quite a lot over the years, in that, people sit here and say, I'm looking for a job, and they talk about the challenges of that, and, there's thousands of applications and blah, 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 blah. And you ask them what the end goal is, and the end goal might be, I don't know, I want to be a CDAO. Okay. So, but you're here at the minute and you want to get there. And so maybe there's a couple of stepping stones here, but how common is that for people to think that way? Or is that kind of a bit of a journey that sometimes you have to take people on?
Yeah. So that's another really great one. I think when I was a headhunter, people would come to me and say, hey, I'm this great person. Tell me what jobs I could do. Like they didn't ask it in their way, but they would say like, oh, well, I'm doing this now. And I'm also interested in board roles, and I take a CEO position if you wanted to call me about it. And I think that open-endedness means, if that's the sort of way you want to answer the question, I would just encourage people to set that hour up in their diary and do that once a quarter and kind of be thoughtful. If once a quarter is too often, like do it once every 6 months. I would say that, the maturity of the data and analytics space has really accelerated in the last decade. You now need to be more thoughtful about your career because people are getting more specialized. So whereas before 10 years ago, there were only a certain number of roles, you could move between industries super fluidly. And I don't think these are gone. It's just because there's more specificity and more talent in this space, and combined with the fact that we are having, there is a lot of headcount reduction that's going on in different organizations. Companies are cutting talent, and that means great people are available on the market. So with increased competition, you have to be more thoughtful. So I don't know if people have thought about it more in the past, but I do know going forward, people have to think about it more. And I'll tell you, this is happening at every stage. Those master's degree students at Imperial, one of the best ranked programs, before had jobs everywhere. Every company wanted them. Now they have to do quite a lot of work to find roles. And if it's starting at that if I'm seeing that at that entry level, it's happening everywhere. So if you're having to hustle to find the role, you might as well spend the effort finding a role that's going to make you happy. So thinking about what is it that are the things that I want, I think results, in better long-term career outcomes than just taking the next thing that comes along.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I was having a conversation actually with a really good contact of mine who had been on the market looking, had secured a new role at kind of director level, and said, that the week that he accepted the role, he had 3 approaches about CDO roles elsewhere, and I was like, "What did I tell you? Timing is everything, right?" You know, the old adage about buses, but it just goes to show the opportunities out there,
Yeah.
for sure. So it's the positioning and being intentional, I think, is probably the right
Right.
word.
I also think the other important part of that is just communicating your value is so important. We were talking about this, weren't we, Kyle? Just like, you really need to now develop a concise, compelling pitch, and you need to tailor that to different stakeholders. So whereas a lot of people I talked to when I was a headhunter, maybe they could get away with, "Hey, Julia, I am great. Like, help position me in something in tech, digital data and analytics security. I'm open and call me for a board role." I had a lot of roles to fill. So I was good at listening to what someone said. And like you said, I could do the translation. So it worked out okay. But now the onus, I think, is on the talent because the market is scarcer than it was. And so really people need to develop that concise pitch. It needs to be focused on the achievements and the outcomes that get quantified. And as part of that, I think I would encourage everybody who's to just like create a repository of specific stories that speak to these different things that you've achieved and write those down and review them. And I work on this in phase 2 with my clients. And I think learning to articulate like your unique value proposition. So when, Kyle, if you've got somebody, one of these directors who's calling you up, that director needs to know, actually, the thing I encourage everybody to think about is, what do you want Kyle to say about you after Kyle's hung up? After you've hung up with the call with Kyle. And I work with this with my clients all the time. And it's often they're like, wow, I haven't thought about it that way. But it's like, what do you want Kyle to say about you when you're no longer in the room talking at him? And the easier that your candidates can make that for you cognitively so that you don't have to spend your brain energy making it simple, the better off their positioning is to you, and then your positioning to your clients, and then ultimately for them in that role. So that communication piece, I think, is just probably one of the biggest things that people can invest in.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any kind of little practical hints or tips or maybe exercises that people can take away from this that will allow them to kind of try and hone in on what that kind of, it's almost like an elevator pitch, right? In some instances.
Yep. So I have a great one. And it is an AI tool. So if you haven't found Notebook LM yet, check it out. Go to Notebook LM, upload your CV to Notebook LM. I do this with all my clients, and my clients do it for themselves because I won't share their data. They have to share it themselves, and listen to the podcast that gets created about your own CV.
Wow.
And if you're not able to identify what your unique selling, actually, I would encourage you first to write down what your unique selling points are, then go to Notebook LM and listen to what the podcast, and the podcast is super cool. It's these 2 admittedly very American sounding people who go back and forth about the person whose CV gets uploaded. And it's just really nice to hear something about you, said by other people. And sometimes it helps create these insights. Often it either helps affirm insights I've already identified with my clients, or we find new threads and we bring all of that to create together to create that interesting, compelling pitch that everybody needs to have.
Nice.
That's definitely something everybody should try.
That's super fascinating. Is that used then more to kind of try to hone in on, is my CV relevant in terms of how this thing is articulating who I am? Is it relevant, or is it more to try and pull ideas and threads out of the CV that might be compelling?
Great question. So I use it at 2 points. One, I use it with my clients before we've done any magic work on their CV. So it's kind of like, what's the narrative your CV is telling you now? And are there any inspirational insights that help you identify what your unique selling points are? Because sometimes we need outside in inspiration. And I help to provide that outside inspiration for my clients. But I love adding, me plus the app power of AI is a much better multiplier.
Yeah.
And then we do it again once we've modified their CV, and we listen to, okay, we have very carefully crafted this particular narrative, with a lot of thought and effort. What is it telling us now? And we basically, at that point, we want it to be confirming the things that we want it to say. So we use it at 2 different points, and that's how we use it. So identification and then confirmation.
Nice. Got a few questions come in. Let's try and tackle these as we can. So William has asked, is there an ageist mindset as CV with buckets of experience suggesting you are not with it? Interesting question. Go on, Julia, what do you think?
I mean, there is a lot there. And maybe it starts with, do I put my university graduation date down on my CV or not? You can decide what is the right thing for you to do. But I have clients hiring people in their late 50s and early 60s, and I will, including groups that at certain points were being biased against, not biased for, towards. I believe that if you have the right compelling pitch, the right assets, including the right stories to explain to a company that you're there as their partner and will take them through and that together you'll solve it. There is no time where you're too old or too young, right? Maybe you don't have enough experience, but it's showing that you bring curiosity and combine new skills to help solve problems.
Yeah, 100%. Wakas has asked a very good question here, Julia. What advice would you give someone who is looking to step away from the technical roles and step into a leadership role, which is a very common part of the journey where people probably come or feel like they come a little bit unstuck, right?
Yeah, that's great. I would look at those things as not mutually exclusive. I'd look at them as kind of additive things that, that will cost that you or others that want to move are able to do. I'd say the first, as you were talking about, Kyle, it's sort of like multi-steps. A first great step is to try and get leadership responsibility within the area that you work, within the companies that you work, because they're usually willing to, make that leap. If for whatever reason the organization can't see you as someone who will do that, number one, it's good to take some self-reflection and figure out why. Try and get honest feedback to the extent possible. Maybe you get it informally through other people to find out, well, are there skill gaps that you've got that you can address through training? Or is there something else that you can do that helps the organization to see you in that kind of way? If you need to get it outside, I would say, going back to that point where like the roles are tight at the moment, often when companies are using, headhunters like Kyle, like you, and people like I have been, they go to headhunters to find someone who's already done something that kind of looks like that. So it means that you're one of the things that you should look to do is to either network through your own existing network to try and talk to people who would maybe give you that chance for the leadership position. Or apply for roles directly. It might not be through a headhunter that you would actually end up getting that first opportunity. Now, there are exceptions to everything that I have just said. Like you said, Kyle, timing is everything. But my advice would really be try and do it from within first, and then try and get it through your network, because making those leaps can be quite difficult. But positioning yourself that you have those intrinsic abilities is great.
Yeah, absolutely. So what advice can you give someone in the middle of their career, experience in mid to senior leadership and struggling to get interviews? Run out of runway. We'll review my LinkedIn and resume to look at leadership, collaboration, strategist, and how my job experience showcases my achievements plus impact equals value. Okay, so basically someone in the middle of their career, experiencing mid to senior leadership, struggling to get interviews, what advice would you give them, Julia?
Yeah, I would say something's wrong with what I call your assets. So your LinkedIn, your CV, your stories, they are, if you're looking for a role that's exactly like what you're doing right now and not getting an opportunity to interview, then your assets aren't showing you as being ready for those things. Like I recently worked with a client who had all of the right skills and experience, but got feedback in interviews that they just didn't operate at the sufficiently senior level, strategic level. And he had already been engaging with the board, and he had that ability to be able to report into a COO, for instance, of a medium-sized business. We're not talking FTSE 50. And so after a couple of coaching sessions, we were able to unpack where in his stories was he going wrong. So sometimes it also takes someone from the outside, but you have to be ready to make those changes. Recognize, take the data. It's what's great about this group. Use the data. The data proves that something's not working, and then test and learn. So with my clients, we often say, hey, let's test this banner. Let's test this photo. Let's see how this it gets engagement from the market, and then if in 3 months we're not getting the response we want, and yes, it's not all how it looks, but that was one thing we were even talking about, was specifically even those bits of the asset, then how should you make a change?
Yep. Nice. Perfect. Last question, I think, unless anyone drops into the DMs. Obviously, we started about 10 past because of our major hiccup. So Karima has asked, do you see differences between countries? I guess the maturity of working with data overall is different between the US and Sweden. We've seen more requests for hiring in the UK compared to France. Yeah, I guess geographical differences. Anything of note there, Julia?
Yeah. So I do definitely see geographical differences. It depends, on the kind of role that you're looking at. If we're going to talk kind of top senior most level role, when I was at Spencer Stuart, my colleagues in the US, there was a lot more talk amongst CEOs for chief data and analytics officers to report directly into CEO, for instance. And for Europe, I was always pushing that much more with my CEO clients, or, CFO or COO clients. I saw it transition away from CFO direct report actually quite a lot in my 7 years at Spencer Stuart. And so that was really great. And that was part of the narrative that we were proactively pushing. And then as I talked about in Asia, maybe things weren't as mature in the same way. And you define maturity in different ways. I just mean in terms of a demand for a CDAO who was reporting into CEO. But actually what I saw a lot more in Asia was maybe family offices or family businesses that were hiring that kind of talent that maybe had a bit more hands-on data science skills, who had the curiosity, maybe needed less change management, but was more kind of startup, being able to bring that kind of mindset.
Yep. One more for the road, I think. So thank you very much, Amit. That's very kind of you. He's asked, how can data professionals effectively transition into leadership roles, and what are some of the common pitfalls to avoid? So any kind of major pitfalls that you see people make, Julia, to avoid?
Definitely talking about the tech and the tools and what I call foundations. So if you think about your data and analytics capability as like a house, only working on the plumbing and the flooring and the cement and the foundations, that's sort of not where leaders are. For anyone, to position yourself as a leader of the business, you need to operate like a leader of the business. And a leader of the business talks about the commercial opportunity. What are you selling? How is business? And therefore, how does what you do fit into that? Another thing I would really suggest is find a problem within the organization that you can help solve and proactively offer to go help solve it. Whether it's been given to you or not, go offer to help and then be part of solving that. And through that, new opportunities will come.
Yeah, 100%. Last question, and this is from me. What I see a lot of, and I'd be curious to see how you would tell your clients to address this, is business leaders specifically. So when you're talking to people that aren't data professionals, when they're thinking about hiring someone at a relatively senior level, they understand that the impact this person should have should be commercial, quantifiable, strategic, etc. And yet somehow through that flow through of getting to a job description, you still end up with things like Python on the requirements, right? Which is unfortunate to see. But how do you get that balance right between knowing actually what the business as a commercial entity wants versus maybe what the job description tells you they want?
I think that's where it's a privilege to be a headhunter, and getting to play that delicate balancing act between listening to what your clients want and not necessarily reading every word written on the page exactly the way that it's written. And that, I think, is what AI loses, and that is a shame, because you don't have that opportunity to translate. This is what you've written, but I heard what you said, and what you said is not the same as what you've written. And I also would often say, hey, you want the person who codes, who also operates at board level and CEO level. This is how much they cost. There were 10 of them. They all cost this. Like, your budget is this. So either you choose to pay more, that's fine. I'll introduce you to those people right away. Or here's what you can afford. Let me show you 3 of these, 3 of these, 3 of these. We figure out whether Python is what's the top. Also working on prioritization. but it is never a fun conversation. It's hard, but I
I
think
feel like I spend my life in that conversation.
yeah. And we are there a bit now, right? With the AI platforms. Again, this whole like being super technical and coding and what are your technical skills are kind of coming in again.
Yeah.
I don't know how important that really is. I'm seeing a lot too in the CTO world. So the chief technology officers who didn't necessarily code, but are great leaders of technology organizations are now being asked if they code, even in Python.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I don't, but I know how to like make money from your technology, really what is important. But some of them aren't getting interviews because they don't have the tech skills.
Yeah.
And that's maybe where a certification will help.
Yeah.
A quick one.
And there's definitely been a big inflation of, the kind of AI engineering world. Like some of the salaries in that space for kind of mid-level engineers are just off the charts, right?
Yeah.
Which we see that these things happen in cycles with every boom. So not to be surprised. But Julia, thanks so much for your time. A super insightful chat. Obviously, a lot of love for you here in the comments, which is great to see. Thank you for bearing with me on the horrendous
Thanks,
start.
everybody. No, you were the problem solver, Kyle. You got us there, and that's what the world needs. It's great problem solving.
That's what happens when the team leave me to my own devices. But I really appreciate you coming on with us, and look forward to speaking to you again soon. And stay tuned for next time, everybody. Thank you.